This is not just a flight. This is a mirror. A 13-year-old boy boarded with a ticket and left with a scar, not because he was wrong, but because no one dared to be right. This story is not rare. It's just the one they couldn't hide. You may not be ready to watch what happens next, but you should. The gate buzzed with muted excitement as first-class passengers were called to board. Polished shoes clicking against tile, designer bags gliding effortlessly behind tailored suits and diamond bracelets, a hushed world of entitlement, preparing to ascend above the clouds. And then, he appeared. A boy, 13 at most, tall for his age, with warm brown skin, curly hair neatly trimmed, and a simple navy hoodie zipped up to his chin. He walked with quiet certainty down the jet bridge, one hand gripping the strap of a well-worn backpack, the other holding a boarding pass. He didn't need to check twice. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, conversations paused, mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyebrows lifted, and the air changed. Not loudly, but sharply. He paused beside seat 1A, checked the number once, and sat down without hesitation. A blonde woman in pearls across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her scarf. A man in a Rolex leaned in to his wife and muttered, "Whose kid is this?" The boy heard it. He heard all of it, but he didn't look up. He placed his backpack under the seat, pulled out a book, and began to read. Then came the voice. Clipped, practiced, rehearsed to sound helpful, but honed to condescend. "Excuse me, sweetheart. I think you're in the wrong section," said Nancy, the lead flight attendant, smiling tightly, her eyes scanning him like a barcode that didn't belong. The boy looked up, blinked once, and said, "No, I'm not." Nancy's smile stiffened. "May I see your ticket, please? It's right there on the seat," he said calmly, nodding to the slip tucked into the armrest. She picked it up, examined it with visible disbelief, then looked back at him as if she were solving a puzzle that didn't quite make sense. "And where are your parents?" she asked, still smiling, but now the edge showed. "Not on this flight," he said, his voice level, his eyes steady. "I'm traveling alone." The pearl-clad woman let out a soft gasp, loud enough to be heard. Alone in first class. Nancy's eyebrows rose. "Oh, really? Well, that's very impressive." The word hung in the air like a challenge. The boy went back to his book. Nancy didn't move. Not yet. But behind her eyes, something twisted. A quiet decision forming. Around them, other passengers watched, not speaking, but judging, calculating, feeding off each other's doubt like dry grass catching fire. And above it all, the cabin lights flickered gently, soft jazz playing through the speakers, as if nothing wrong had just walked in, when in truth, something very right had just unsettled their world. Nancy didn't walk away. She lingered beside seat 1A with the practiced poise of someone used to getting the last word, her smile still there. But now it quivered, thin as paper, sharp as glass. "Are you sure you're in the right seat, honey?" she asked again, louder this time, her voice floating over the nearby rows like a test balloon for judgment. Eli didn't flinch. He turned a page in his book and said quietly, "Yes, ma'am." The woman in pearls leaned closer, whispering to the man beside her. "He's probably flying on points." Her husband chuckled, not kindly. From row 1C, a man in a fitted blazer angled his phone, pretending to check messages, but already recording. Another passenger, a young influencer type, slid sunglasses onto her nose and began live streaming discreetly, camera pointed toward the boy. The title popped up, "Kid tries to fake first class, watch this unfold." Nancy's hand hovered above the armrest, not touching Eli but hovering close enough to intrude. I'm sorry, but this section is reserved for premium travelers. I just want to be sure you haven't made a mistake. Eli raised his eyes then, steady, clear. I haven't. A ripple went through the cabin, a silent wave of smirks, scoffs, and knowing glances. Do you have someone we can speak to? Nancy asked. A parent, a guardian, someone who can confirm. I have my ticket, he interrupted, polite but firm. That confirms everything. Nancy stiffened. She wasn't used to being interrupted. She wasn't used to being challenged by someone who, in her mind, had no place doing either. Look, she said, lowering her voice but not her condescension. I don't know how you got this seat, but people pay thousands to be up here, and we have rules. A voice from the back chimed in. Probably a mistake in the system. Another, I've seen this before. Airline giveaways. Laughter. Eli looked out the window. Not at them. Not anymore. Nancy leaned in one last time, her voice cold enough to crystallize the air. If you don't move to coach, I'll be forced to involve the captain. Eli turned to her slowly, meeting her eyes, and said, Do what you need to do. She blinked, taken off guard. Behind her, the man in the blazer whispered, He's got some attitude. The live stream chat was flooding. Entitled much. No way he paid for that seat. Watch her call security. Nancy stood straight, adjusted her name badge, and walked away with clipped heels echoing her pride. A moment passed. Eli exhaled, but only once. Then, a hand tapped his shoulder. A different flight attendant, younger, kinder, leaned down and whispered, Do you need anything? Sir, sir. One word, one kindness. Eli shook his head. I'm okay. Thank you. But the storm wasn't over. It was just circling the cabin, waiting for a reason to break wide open. The plane had begun taxiing, soft vibrations humming beneath the floor as the engines roared to life. But inside the first-class cabin, all eyes stayed on row 1A, on the boy who refused to disappear. Nancy returned with quick, deliberate steps, her face now a mask. The kind people wear when they feel both threatened and superior. A dangerous combination. She didn't speak at first. She simply stopped in front of Eli, arms crossed, waiting for him to look up. He didn't. He kept reading. She leaned down, closer this time, her voice sharp as broken glass. I told you to move to coach, and I told you I'm in the right seat, he replied, still calm, still steady. The plane turned onto the runway, flight attendants strapped in, but Nancy stayed standing, towering over a child she had already decided did not belong. I don't care what your little piece of paper says, she snapped, her voice louder now, carrying to every seat in the cabin. If you don't get up right now, I will remove you myself. You can't touch me, Eli said softly, but his voice trembled now, just a little. That tremble was all she needed. It gave her permission. Her hand shot forward, not toward his face, not yet. First to the backpack beneath his feet. She yanked it hard, pulling it into the aisle. Eli grabbed for it instinctively. Give it back, he said, louder this time. Nancy held it out of reach, mockingly, like a parent disciplining a child in front of strangers. You want to fight now, she hissed. Is that what this is? Don't touch me, Eli said again, louder, his book slipping from his lap, his voice cracked with fear. And then it happened, quick, sharp, final. Her open palm struck his cheek with a sound so clear, so intimate, it silenced the entire cabin in an instant. A gasp tore through the air. Someone dropped a wine glass. The live stream caught every frame. Eli's head jerked sideways. His lip trembled. His hands froze mid-air. He didn't cry. Not right away. His chest just rose and fell in silence, like he was trying to remember how to breathe. Then, like a dam breaking, he curled in on himself, both arms wrapped around his chest, and the first sob escaped. Not loud, but sharp enough to gut the silence. Nancy didn't apologize. She stepped back, arms crossed again, daring anyone to challenge her. No one moved. Not the man in the blazer, not the woman in pearls, not the passengers who had filmed it. No one spoke. No one helped. No one said, "Stop." A voice crackled through the speakers. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." The plane began to rise into the sky, carrying with it a truth no one could take back. Eli sat in silence, tears streaking down one cheek, staring straight ahead. He said nothing, but in his right hand, hidden beneath the tray table, his fingers curled around a phone, and soon the skies would shake. The plane leveled high above the clouds, silver wings slicing through pale blue silence. But in seat 1A, Eli sat still as stone, his hands clenched in his lap, the side of his face glowing red from Nancy's slap, his breath shallow, eyes locked on the seat in front of him, like if he moved even slightly, the whole plane would collapse. No one looked at him now, not directly. The woman in pearls stared out the window. The man with the Rolex adjusted his tray table 3 times, without reason. Nancy disappeared behind the curtain, confident in her power, certain there would be no consequences at 38,700 feet. But Eli wasn't thinking about her anymore. He wasn't thinking about the sting on his cheek, or the burning knot in his chest, or the hundreds of strangers who had seen him be broken and did nothing. He was thinking about his father. Slowly, silently, Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a matte black phone. One that didn't buzz with games or social media. One that didn't even have a brand. He tapped the screen once. No password needed. Just a clean, direct screen with 5 contacts and 1 button, glowing red. He pressed it. A soft click. No ring. No name. Just silence. Then a voice answered. A man's voice. Deep, calm, dangerous. Eli didn't say hello. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for help. He simply whispered 4 words, steady and clear. Initiate executive override. Now. Then he hung up. He slipped the phone back into his hoodie pocket, closed his eyes, and leaned his head against the window. Outside, the clouds looked calm, but below them, an entire system had already begun to move. In a glass-walled control room thousands of miles away, a red alert blinked on a secured monitor. An operator picked up a phone with shaking hands. In the cockpit of the plane, the captain's radio hissed with a sound he'd never heard before. A direct override from a channel that bypassed airline authority and went straight to the top. The co-pilot paled. "Sir, they want us to divert. Immediately." "On whose order?" the captain asked. "It's not an order, sir. It's a command." Back in first class, no one noticed the shift. Not yet. But above them, below them, all around them, the sky had started to bend. The captain blinked twice at the command flashing on his screen, red text pulsing against the cockpit lights like a heartbeat, out of sync with the world. Executive override priority 1. Flight 788 immediate diversion required. The co-pilot leaned forward, voice dry. "We've been rerouted mid-air." No explanation, no option to refuse. The captain tapped his headset. "This is Flight 788, requesting clarification on override authority." But the voice that came through was not from ground control, not from dispatch, not even from the FAA. It was deeper, cleaner, encrypted. This is executive command. Immediate compliance is non-negotiable. Confirm diversion to nearest authorized facility. The captain looked up sharply. Who the hell has the power to override a flight in progress? The co-pilot shook his head slowly. Only 2 people on Earth. And I think this is one of them. In the cabin, the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an unexpected technical request. Please remain seated as we adjust our course. Gasps erupted like lightning in a storm. The woman in pearls dropped her wine. The man with the Rolex snapped upright. Adjust. What do you mean, adjust? We just took off. Nancy peeked out from behind the galley curtain, eyes darting nervously down the aisle. She knew something was wrong. Something big. But not why. Not yet. Eli didn't move. He sat in silence, the only one calm, as if he'd always known the sky would listen to him when no one else would. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The plane banked left, sharply enough that drinks tipped. Trays clattered. Someone cursed. Are we turning around? A passenger shouted. Is it terrorism? What's going on? The live streamers had stopped filming Eli. Now, they were filming everything. One of them whispered, "What kind of kid makes a plane turn around?" And then they saw it. The jet dipped low into a sudden descent, smooth but forceful, unapologetic. A mechanical voice came over the PA, this time robotic and cold. Flight path has been adjusted. Do not interfere with crew instructions. Law enforcement will meet aircraft upon arrival. Nancy's face drained to chalk. She turned to the backup flight attendant, voice trembling. What the hell is going on? But the answer was already walking down the jet bridge. They just didn't know it yet. Eli finally looked up, gazing down the aisle with unreadable eyes, and whispered under his breath, "It's almost time." Outside, the runway was already cleared. On the ground, a convoy of black SUVs flanked a silver Rolls-Royce with diplomatic plates and tinted windows. Inside that car, a man adjusted the cuff of his suit jacket, tapped once on his phone, and said, 2 minutes. His driver nodded. The world was about to learn who the boy in seat 1A really was, and who they had just touched at 38, sur warrant feet. The plane touched down harder than expected, wheels screaming against the asphalt, and the sudden weight of gravity returned like a judgment passed. Passengers jerked in their seats, some gasping, some crossing themselves, others whispering questions that had no answers. Where are we? Why did we land? What the hell is going on? The windows revealed nothing but tarmac and flashing blue lights. No terminal in sight. Just an isolated runway flanked by black SUVs, tinted, gleaming, motionless like predators in a circle. The captain's voice came on, tense and robotic. Please remain seated. We are under executive review. Authorities will board shortly. Nancy's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she clutched the galley edge. Executive review, she whispered. We're not under investigation, are we? The younger flight attendant looked pale, wide-eyed, her headset crackling with internal codes she'd never heard before. And then, silence, so thick it crushed the cabin air. The jet bridge didn't extend. No gate opened. Instead, the forward cabin door was unlocked manually from outside. A ground crewman stepped back. Then a man stepped in. No uniform, no ID badge, just a tailored black suit, sharp as vengeance. His stride clean, unhurried, like the floor moved to meet his feet. He was tall, dark-skinned, bald, eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses, even in the cabin's dim light. His presence sucked the oxygen from the room, his silence louder than the engine that had just powered down. No one needed to ask who he was. Every screen in the world had shown his face. Malcolm Rivers. Tech tycoon. media magnate, builder of empires, and man whose net worth eclipsed the GDP of small nations, and father of the boy in seat 1A. The entire cabin went still. No one breathed. No one dared. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, every eye following, his gaze fixed ahead, not scanning, not searching. He already knew. Nancy tried to step forward, words scrambling to form. "Sir, I think there's been—" But Malcolm didn't even look at her, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge the existence of noise from irrelevant people. He stopped beside Eli, knelt down, removed his glasses. "Did she hit you?" he asked softly. Eli nodded once. "Did anyone stop her?" Another nod. No. Malcolm stood up, turned, faced the entire cabin with eyes that burned through fabric, bone, and ego. "Who touched my son?" The silence that followed was not silence. It was collapse. Nancy stepped backward. I didn't know who he was." "You didn't need to," Malcolm said, his voice low, cold, lethal. "You only needed to be human." The woman in pearls covered her mouth. The Rolex man shrank into his seat. The live streamer dropped her phone in her lap, unable to press stop. Malcolm took one step forward. "You failed that test," he said, and pointed at Nancy. "You failed it for the last time." Nancy tried to speak, but her throat closed on itself, her body rigid as Malcolm took one step closer, not shouting, not raising a finger, yet towering over her with a silence more devastating than rage. "You struck a minor," he said, voice low but sharp enough to draw blood, in front of witnesses, on camera, at 38,000 feet. He turned slightly toward the cabin, and not one of you said a word. Eyes dropped, heads turned. The woman in pearls visibly shook, her hands clutching her scarf like it could hide her complicity. Malcolm shifted his gaze back to Nancy. "You will never touch another passenger again, not under this airline, not under any name we own. And we own more than you know." He tapped once on his phone, and in the blink of a moment, Nancy's work badge pinged red, her system access locked, her employment history stamped with the digital scarlet letter, "Terminated for cause." She gasped, "Please." "I didn't know who he was." Malcolm's jaw clenched. "You didn't need to know who he was. You only needed to know he was human." The younger flight attendant, standing behind Nancy, whispered, "Sir, I tried to help." Malcolm looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. He nodded once, respectful, "And you will be recognized for it." Then his voice hardened again, steel behind velvet. "But there will be no place here for those who see color before character." A security officer boarded silently, stepping behind Nancy, waiting. She turned to the passengers as if pleading for rescue, but no one moved. The man with the Rolex looked away, ashamed. The live streamer's eyes brimmed with tears as she stared at the footage she had captured, the one she had helped amplify, without ever questioning what she was showing the world. Malcolm pointed toward the door. "Walk out or be carried out." Nancy choked on a sob, then moved. Fast, stiff, almost robotic. As if each step out of the cabin was a layer of her identity peeling away. The silence she left behind wasn't relief. It was reckoning. Malcolm turned back to Eli, placed a hand on his son's shoulder, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The message had already scorched itself into the memory of every soul on board. You don't need to recognize someone's power to respect their presence. Because if you don't, the sky itself might turn on you. By the time the plane taxied to a remote gate, the internet had already ignited. The live stream, shaky, raw, real, had hit 1 million views in 37 minutes. Major news networks picked it up before the passengers even stepped off the jet. The hashtags surged like wildfire across every platform. Flight 788. He was 13. Slapped at 38K. And most vicious of all, Nancy from first class. The airline scrambled, unprepared for the scale of fury, barreling toward them like a second jet from the sky. Their statement, weak, late, and bloodless, was ripped apart within seconds. We are aware of an incident involving a minor and are conducting a review. The public roared back. He's not an incident. He's a child. Nancy's name, already trending, became a symbol, not of one woman's cruelty, but of a system's indifference. 1,000 old videos of customer mistreatment resurfaced, but none cut deeper than the image of a black child, sitting alone in first class, red mark on his face, head bowed, silence louder than screams. Eli didn't speak to reporters. He didn't need to. His father did everything with silence and action. Within 24 hours, Malcolm's legal team issued a full public liability claim against the airline's leadership. Stock dropped by 14%. The board held an emergency session at midnight. The CEO offered to resign. Malcolm refused. You don't get to leave. He told him over video call. You get to stay and fix it. By morning, every flight attendant and staff member who enabled, ignored, or recorded the abuse without intervention had been flagged and suspended, pending full investigation. Internally, they called it the Eli Protocol. The woman who live-streamed the slap posted an apology video, tear-streaked and shaking. I didn't help him. I filmed him, and I thought it was entertainment. Comments below her video were ruthless, but a few said what mattered. At least you admitted it. The rest stayed silent. On news panels, pundits raged. On college campuses, students protested. And in airports everywhere, staff began to whisper the name Eli Rivers, not as a scandal, but as a warning. Check your bias, or you might just lose your wings. 3 weeks later, a press conference was held beneath the soaring glass atrium of Monarch Aviation Hall. Every major network's camera pointed at the dark blue banner behind the podium. White letters bold and simple. The Eli Initiative. Malcolm stood before it, not as the billionaire tycoon, not as the angry father, but as a builder. Of futures. Of systems that no longer failed the people they claimed to serve. This is not a response, he said, voice steady but fierce. It's a redefinition. Behind him stood the first cohort of trainees. Future flight attendants. All backgrounds, all colors, all quiet with purpose, having just completed the most rigorous anti-bias and human dignity program ever implemented in aviation. A program Malcolm had fully funded, staffed, and launched in less than 21 days. And at the center of it all sat a reserved, composed 13-year-old boy in a dark suit, no tie, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable, but unmistakably strong. Eli. He hadn't spoken publicly, hadn't done interviews, hadn't posted a single word, and yet his presence filled the room more than any speech could. Beside him sat the young flight attendant who had asked him softly, "Do you need anything, sir?" Now promoted, now mentoring others in how to lead with instinctive compassion. Across the country, airports began replacing customer service training with what they called the 1A standard. A commitment to dignity before data, humanity before protocol. And in classrooms, young boys like Eli were asked, "What would you have done?" And some said, "I would have cried." And others said, "I would have fought." And a few said, "I'd call my father, too." But most just said, "I wouldn't have had the strength." And teachers would answer, "That's why we remember him." In the corner of the event hall, A bronze plaque had already been mounted. Beneath it, a single quote from Eli himself, spoken in a quiet hallway, to a nervous intern just days earlier, never meant to be recorded. But someone had. Because some moments don't need microphones. They just need truth. They tried to take my seat. I gave them back a standard. The footage is archived now. Not just in newsreels or viral compilations, but in textbooks, in training rooms, in the quiet corners of minds that once looked away. It plays on classroom projectors beside names like Rosa, Claudette, Emmett, and now, Eli, not for what he shouted, but for what he endured, not for vengeance, but for stillness, not for power, but for the moment he turned pain into pause, and pause into precedent. Above it all, planes still fly, gate agents still call out names, flight attendants still smile, but somewhere in every airport, a seat is left open just a little longer, a voice holds its tone just a little gentler, and someone, somewhere, remembers the boy in 1A, the one they touched because they didn't see him, and the man who landed a plane to make sure they never forgot. Eli doesn't seek stages, but sometimes, change doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs altitude, a truth spoken not loudly, but high enough to be heard by the world, and as the screen fades to black, a single sentence appears, glowing in silence like cabin lights before descent. Respect isn't earned by appearance, but disrespect will always land hard. They laughed. They filmed. They stayed quiet. And then he made a call. And the sky bent for justice. Some lessons are taught at school, others at 38. Sarin feet. Next time you ignore a stranger's pain, remember, one whisper from the wrong child can force the whole world to land.